Bible is more than a collection of ancient writings. It's the greatest story ever told, spanning creation, fall, redemption, and the ultimate restoration of all things. From the opening words of Genesis to the glorious finale of Revelation, each chapter weaves a tapestry of God's love, grace, and purpose for humanity. In this series, we journey through the foundational stories of Scripture: the formation of the world, the covenant with Abraham, the exodus of God's people, the wisdom of the prophets, the birth and mission of Jesus Christ, and the hope of eternal life. These timeless narratives reveal who God is, who we are, and the profound relationship between Creator and creation. Together, we'll uncover the threads that connect every story into one seamless masterpiece, the story of God's plan to rescue and renew the world. Let's step into the pages of history, faith, and hope, and discover how these ancient truths still speak powerfully today. After the miraculous crossing of the Red Sea, the Israelites set out on their journey through the wilderness, led by the visible manifestation of God's presence, the pillar of cloud by day and fire by night. Their surroundings were stark and desolate. Jagged, sun-scorched mountains and barren plains stretched around them, with the sea behind them still bearing the evidence of God's deliverance. The bodies of the Egyptian army washed upon its shores. Despite the barren terrain, the people were filled with joy and relief. Slavery was behind them, and they were now a free people, walking under the protection of the Almighty. But the jubilation did not last long. For 3 days they traveled without finding water. Under the relentless desert sun, their water supply dwindled. Thirst set in, and desperation began to mount. As they neared a place called Marah, the cry rang out, "Water!" Hope surged among the people, but that hope was quickly crushed when the water was found to be bitter and unfit for drinking. Disappointment turned to anger, and the people turned on Moses, forgetting that it was not he but God who was leading them by the cloud. Moses, distressed but faithful, did what the people had not. He cried out to the Lord. God answered by showing Moses a tree. When Moses cast it into the water, it was miraculously made sweet. Here, God revealed himself as their healer and gave them a powerful promise. If you will diligently listen to the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in his sight, I will put none of the diseases upon you which I brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord that heals you. From Marah, the people journeyed to Elim, a welcome oasis, with 12 wells of water and 70 palm trees, a symbol of God's gracious provision. They encamped there for some time, refreshed by its shade and water, before moving into the wilderness of Sin. It was now a full month since their departure from Egypt. As their journey continued, their provisions ran low. Though not yet starving, anxiety set in. The memory of Egyptian flesh pots and bread began to seem sweeter than the uncertainty of the desert. They murmured against Moses and Aaron, saying they wished they had died in Egypt, rather than be brought out to die of hunger in the wilderness. The leaders bore their complaints, but Moses reminded them that their murmurings were not truly against him, but against the Lord. Had they possessed faith in God, in view of all that he had wrought for them, they would cheerfully have borne inconvenience, privation, and even real suffering. But they were unwilling to trust the Lord any further than they could witness the continual evidences of his power. They forgot their bitter service in Egypt. They forgot the goodness and power of God displayed in their behalf, in their deliverance from bondage. They forgot how their children had been spared when the destroying angels slew all the firstborn of Egypt. They forgot the grand exhibition of divine power at the Red Sea. They forgot that while they had crossed safely in the path that had been opened for them, the armies of their enemies attempting to follow them. Yet God, in mercy, responded not with rebuke, but with provision. He promised to rain down bread from heaven. Each morning, the ground would be covered with a white, delicate substance like frost. The people were to gather just enough for each day, an omer per person. On the 6th day, they were to gather double, for no manna would fall on the Sabbath. This was to be a continual reminder of the sanctity of God's holy day. In the evening, God sent quail to cover the camp, providing meat. In the morning, the dew lifted and revealed the manna, which the people called bread from heaven. Moses declared, "This is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat." It could be prepared in various ways, ground, baked, or made into cakes, and its taste was like wafers made with honey. Some tried to hoard it until the next day, but it bred worms and stank. Only the portion gathered before the Sabbath remained fresh, teaching them faith in God's daily provision and reverence for His law. Each week, the threefold miracle occurred: a double portion on the sixth day, none on the seventh, and the Sabbath portion kept fresh. This experience reinforced that the Sabbath command was known and observed before Sinai. When some went out to gather manna on the Sabbath, God asked, "How long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws?" For 40 years the Israelites were sustained by manna until they reached the land of Canaan. The psalmist later called it angel's food, a daily reminder of heaven's care. Jesus would later point to the manna as a type of Himself, the true bread of life sent from heaven. "Your fathers did eat manna in the wilderness and are dead," He said, "but he that eats of this bread shall live forever." After leaving the wilderness of sin, the Israelites camped at Rephidim. Once again, there was no water. Thirst turned into accusation. They challenged Moses, crying out, "Give us water," and accused him of bringing them out to kill them and their children with thirst. Their anger turned violent. They were ready to stone him. Moses turned to the Lord, who instructed him to take his rod and go with the elders to the rock at Horeb. There he was to strike the rock, and water would flow out. Moses obeyed, and water gushed forth, quenching the people's thirst. This act, though simple, was filled with divine meaning. The rock was a symbol of Christ, who would be struck for the salvation of humanity, bringing forth the water of life. Moses named the place Massah, temptation, and Meribah, contention, as a memorial of the people's doubt. They had asked, "Is the Lord among us or not?" A question that revealed the depth of their unbelief after all they had witnessed. Soon after, a new threat emerged. The Amalekites, a nomadic and warlike tribe, attacked the rear of the Israelite camp, targeting the weak and weary. God allowed this trial as a consequence of their unbelief and a test of their readiness to trust in Him. The attack was not only a physical threat, but also a spiritual challenge to trust in God's protection and provision. Moses instructed Joshua to lead the defense. While Joshua and his chosen men fought, Moses stood on a nearby hill with the rod of God raised in his hand. As long as his hands were lifted in prayer, Israel prevailed. But when his arms grew weary and fell, Amalek gained the advantage. So Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one on each side, until sunset. The result was a decisive victory. The care of God is over the weakest of His children. No act of cruelty or oppression toward them is unmarked in heaven. This event taught Israel the power of intercession and the need to support their leaders. As Moses interceded on their behalf and Joshua fought with courage, God's power brought the victory. Divine strength was combined with human effort, showing that when we trust God completely, He will fight for us. God commanded Moses to record the event and promised to utterly blot out Amalek's memory. Their attack was not only against Israel, but against God Himself. The Amalekites had heard of the wonders God worked in Egypt, yet mocked and defied Him. Their aggression was unprovoked, and their cruelty sealed their fate. God, who defends the weakest of His people, took note, and judgment was declared. Nearby lived Jethro, Moses' father-in-law. Having heard of Israel's deliverance, he came to the camp bringing Moses' wife and sons. Moses welcomed them with joy and shared all that the Lord had done. Jethro rejoiced and praised God, offering sacrifices in gratitude. Observing Moses' daily burdens, Jethro advised him to delegate judicial responsibilities. Moses was attempting to judge every dispute himself, from morning till evening. Jethro recommended that capable, God-fearing men be appointed over groups of thousands, hundreds, fifties and tens. These men would handle minor issues, while major cases would be brought to Moses. This wise counsel was accepted, bringing relief and order to the camp. The Lord had honored Moses and had wrought wonders by his hand. But the fact that he had been chosen to instruct others did not lead him to conclude that he himself needed no instruction. From Rephidim, the people journeyed once more, following the guiding cloud. Their path led them through rugged terrain and rocky defiles. Often they faced what looked like impassable mountains, but as they approached, a way opened through the cliffs. At last, Mount Sinai rose before them in solemn grandeur. The cloud that had guided them now rested on its peak. They made camp at its base, unaware that here they would remain for nearly a year. The mountain's majesty, the surrounding silence and the presence of God impressed awe upon their hearts. At night, the fiery cloud glowed above Sinai. Each morning, the manna fell with quiet faithfulness, feeding them while they slept. The wilderness became a sanctuary where God would make himself known. Here, God would enter into covenant with his people and give them his law, spoken with his own voice. But before this, he would prepare them spiritually. The bondage and idolatry of Egypt had left its mark on their character. God sought to raise them morally and spiritually to make them his peculiar treasure. The wilderness journey was filled with tests of hunger, thirst, fear, and obedience. It was a school in which God was training a nation to reflect his image. These experiences were not only for ancient Israel, but were recorded for the benefit of all who would walk by faith. Their story reveals human weakness, but also divine patience and grace. Many today look back at the Israelites and marvel at their lack of faith, wondering how they could doubt after so many miracles. Yet, when faced with difficulties, they too often exhibit the same distrust. They worry about the future, doubt God's care, and murmur when trials come. They forget past deliverances and focus only on current discomforts. But God still calls us to trust him day by day. He asks us to cast our cares upon him, for he cares for us. Jesus invites all who labor and are burdened to come to him for rest. True peace comes not from a life without trouble, but from trusting in the one who walks with us through every trial. Paul warned the early Christians, "Take heed, brethren, lest there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief." Our response should not be murmuring, but praise. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits. As God prepared ancient Israel to enter the earthly Canaan, so he is preparing his people for the heavenly one. The journey may be long and filled with hardship, but his presence goes before us. The same God who gave manna, brought water from the rock, and defended his people from their enemies, still leads his children today. His presence is our assurance, guiding and protecting us through every trial we face. Let us remember the lessons of faith, trust, and obedience as we journey onward, knowing that he leads us still. Soon after Israel encamped at Sinai, Moses was called up the mountain to meet with God. Alone, he climbed the rugged path and approached the cloud marking Jehovah's presence. Israel was to enter a special covenant, becoming both a church and a nation under God's rule. The divine message to Moses was, "Ye have seen what I did unto the Egyptians, and how I bare you on eagle's wings, and brought you unto myself. Now, if ye will obey my voice and keep my covenant, then ye shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people. For all the earth is mine, and ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and an holy nation." The people responded, "All that the Lord hath spoken, we will do." They entered into a solemn covenant, pledging to accept God as their ruler. Moses again ascended the mount, and the Lord said, "Lo, I come unto thee in a thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with thee, and believe thee forever." Often when challenges arose, the Israelites murmured against Moses and Aaron. God would now exalt Moses before them to strengthen their trust in his leadership. God planned to reveal his law with majestic grandeur to inspire reverence for his service. He instructed Moses, "Sanctify the people today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes, and be ready against the third day. For the Lord will come down in the sight of all the people upon Mount Sinai." The people were to cleanse themselves, confess their sins, and prepare in humility and prayer. A barrier was erected around the mountain to keep people and animals from touching the sacred ground, on penalty of death. On the third morning, Mount Sinai was enveloped in a dark, thick cloud. Thunder rolled, lightning flashed, and a trumpet blast summoned the people. Moses led them to the base. Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire. The smoke ascended like a furnace, the mountain shook, and the trumpet grew louder and louder. The people trembled, and even Moses exclaimed, "I exceedingly fear and quake." The glory of the Lord was like devouring fire on the top of the mount, in the sight of the assembled multitude, and the voice of the trumpet sounded long and waxed louder and louder. Then the thunders ceased, the trumpet stilled, and a solemn silence fell. Out of the darkness, God's voice was heard. Surrounded by angels, he declared his law to the people. Moses later wrote, "The Lord came from Sinai and rose up from Seir unto them. He came with 10,000s of saints. From his right hand went a fiery law for them." Jehovah revealed himself not only as lawgiver, but also as the deliverer. "I am the Lord thy God, which brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage." The same God who had delivered them now gave his law, not only for Israel, but for all mankind. The 10 Commandments, brief yet comprehensive, define our duty to God and man, founded on love. "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God, and thy neighbor as thyself." The first commandment declared, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." Jehovah, eternal and self-existent, alone deserves supreme worship. Whatever takes God's place in our affections becomes a false god. The second commandment forbade image worship, even in representing the true God. Idolatry lowers our concept of God and degrades the worshipper. God described himself as a jealous God, showing the sacredness of his relationship with his people. Though children suffer from the consequences of their parents' sins, they are not punished unless they share in their guilt. Yet mercy is promised to thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. The third commandment warned against taking God's name in vain, through false oaths, careless speech, or irreverent use. His name should be spoken with reverence. The fourth commandment enjoined Sabbath observance. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. It is a memorial of creation, distinguishing the true God. The Sabbath was established at creation and reaffirmed at Sinai. Its observance is a sign of allegiance to the Creator and contains his name, title, and authority, his seal. God gave man 6 days for labor. The 7th is for sacred rest. Necessary acts of mercy are allowed, but worldly labor and business discussions are to cease. The Sabbath sanctifies the home. All in the household must honor its sacred hours. The 5th commandment commands honor for father and mother, and by extension respect for all authority. It promises long life, not only in Canaan, but in God's eternal kingdom. The 6th commandment, "Thou shalt not kill," forbids not just murder, but hatred, revenge, and anything that endangers life or health, including selfish neglect. The 7th commandment forbids impurity in thought, word, or deed. Christ expanded its meaning to include lustful thoughts. The commandments serve as a foundation for a life of moral integrity and spiritual devotion, guiding the Israelites towards a harmonious community under God's law. The 8th commandment, "Thou shalt not steal," includes all dishonesty, fraud, slavery, oppression, and exploitation of the weak. It upholds integrity and justice. The ninth commandment forbids all falsehood and deception, spoken or implied. It protects reputation and condemns slander, misrepresentation, and withholding truth. The 10th commandment strikes at the root of sin, selfish desire. Covetousness leads to transgression of other commandments. True obedience begins in the heart. These commandments were given with divine majesty so the people would never forget the sacredness of God's law. Overwhelmed by guilt, they begged Moses, "Speak thou with us, but let not God speak with us, lest we die." Moses replied, "Fear not, for God is come to prove you, and that his fear may be before your faces, that ye sin not." The people remained at a distance, while Moses drew near the thick darkness. Because the people were not ready to fully grasp the principles of the Decalogue, additional laws were given to apply them practically. These judgments were delivered privately to Moses. The first laws dealt with servants. Though servitude was allowed, it was humane, limited to 6 years for Hebrew servants, and injuries granted freedom. Man-stealing, murder, and rebellion were punishable by death. Foreign slaves were protected, and mistreatment was forbidden. Having suffered Egyptian bondage, the Israelites were to treat their servants kindly. Widows, orphans, and strangers were also protected, and oppression strictly prohibited. Lending to the poor without interest was required. Pledges like clothing had to be returned by nightfall. Theft required restitution. Respect for rulers was enjoined, and judges were warned against bribery and injustice. These laws ensured justice and compassion within the community, reflecting the divine will Moses was entrusted to convey. Kindness was to be shown even to enemies. Sabbath observance was again emphasized, and annual feasts were instituted, during which the men of Israel would appear before God. All these laws aimed to form a holy nation. "Ye shall be holy men unto me." These instructions were written by Moses under God's direction. God then gave this message: "Behold, I send an angel before thee. Obey his voice, for my name is in him." Christ, in the cloud and fire, led Israel throughout their journey. Moses reported all God's words to the people, who again pledged, "All the words which the Lord hath said will we do." He wrote the covenant in a book, built an altar, and set up 12 pillars for the tribes. Young men offered sacrifices. Moses read the covenant aloud, and the people reaffirmed their vow. He then sprinkled the book and people with blood, sealing the covenant. "This is the blood of the testament which God hath enjoined unto you." Now the nation was to be fully established under God as king. Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and 70 elders were called to ascend the mountain. Only Moses would draw near to God. The elders were honored with a vision of his glory. And they saw the God of Israel, and there was under his feet a paved work of a sapphire stone. Though they did not see God's face, they beheld his majestic presence. Moses and Joshua were then summoned further up. While they waited, Moses appointed Aaron and Hur to govern in his absence. For 6 days the cloud covered the mountain. Moses waited, obedient and patient, using the time for meditation and prayer. Only on the 7th day, the Sabbath, was he called into the cloud. The people saw the glory of the Lord like devouring fire. Moses entered the cloud and remained 40 days and nights. Joshua stayed behind, sustained by manna and water, while Moses fasted. During that time, God gave instructions for building a sanctuary. "Let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell among them." The Sabbath was again emphasized as a perpetual sign between God and Israel, even in the midst of building the tabernacle. Not even the construction of the sanctuary would be permitted on the Sabbath day, as this would still be a violation of the 4th commandment. Even today, no work or secular activities should be done during the sacred hours of the Sabbath. God promised, "I will dwell among the children of Israel and will be their God." The sanctuary would be sanctified by his presence. The Decalogue, engraved by God's own hand on 2 stone tablets, was given to Moses, symbol of God's authority, to be housed in the sanctuary as the center of worship. From a race of slaves, Israel had been exalted to be God's peculiar treasure. Through them, God would preserve the knowledge of his law and character. If faithful, they would become a light to the world, showing the superiority of God's ways over idolatry. Under his guidance, they were called to stand as a holy nation and an example to all the earth. While Moses was on Mount Sinai, the Israelites waited in suspense. They knew he had entered the cloud of divine glory atop the mountain, which flashed with lightning and fire. But as days turned to weeks without his return, doubts grew. Accustomed to physical representations of deity in Egypt, they struggled to trust God. With Moses gone, they felt abandoned and leaderless. Despite the visible cloud still resting on the mount, many feared Moses had perished. This waiting period should have been a time of reflection on God's law and preparation for further revelation. Instead, the people became careless and impatient, especially the mixed multitude among them. Some proposed returning to Egypt, most simply refused to wait any longer. In their fear and confusion, they turned back to old superstitions. The Egyptian practice of calf worship influenced them. They demanded an image to lead them, a god they could see. Despite God's clear command not to create images, they insisted on a physical representation. Aaron, left in charge, lacked the firmness needed at such a moment. When the crowd demanded, "Make us gods to go before us," Aaron weakly resisted but soon gave in. Hoping to discourage them, he asked for their gold earrings, expecting they would not part with them. But they readily surrendered their ornaments. Aaron fashioned a molten calf, and the people proclaimed, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of Egypt." Aaron further enabled their idolatry by building an altar and announcing, "Tomorrow is a feast to the Lord." The next day, under the guise of a religious celebration, they indulged in revelry and immorality. Just days earlier, they had solemnly pledged to obey God. They had stood trembling before Mount Sinai, hearing the commandment, "You shall have no other gods before me." Now they rejected their deliverer and worshipped a golden calf. Meanwhile, on the mountain, God told Moses of the people's corruption. They have turned aside quickly. They have made a molten calf and worshipped it. The Lord declared his intention to destroy them and make a great nation from Moses. The people's continued rebellion and disbelief had forfeited divine favor. Justice demanded their destruction, but Moses interceded. God had said, "Let me alone, that I may consume them." But Moses saw this as an invitation to pray. He reminded God that the people were his, brought out of Egypt by his power. If they were destroyed, Egypt would mock, saying God had only led them out to kill them. Moses pleaded, asking God to turn from his wrath. The Lord heard Moses' prayer and relented. He had tested his servant's faithfulness and found Moses loyal, unselfish, and deeply committed to the people's welfare. Rather than accept the offer of personal greatness, Moses chose to bear the burden of Israel, showing himself a true shepherd. As Moses descended the mountain with the stone tablets, Joshua heard the noise of the camp and thought it was war, but Moses knew it was revelry. As they approached, they saw the people dancing before the idol. Furious, Moses cast down the tablets, breaking them to symbolize the broken covenant. Entering the camp, he destroyed the calf, ground it to powder, scattered it on water, and made the people drink it, demonstrating the worthlessness of their idol. He turned to Aaron and asked, "What did this people do to you that you led them into such sin?" Aaron blamed the people and downplayed his role, falsely suggesting the calf had emerged from the fire by itself. But he had led the apostasy and bore heavy guilt. He, who had seen God's glory, had made an image in the form of an ox. Aaron's sin was all the greater because of his sacred role. Appointed as Moses' spokesman, honored with divine revelations, he had failed to restrain the people. Had he stood firm, reminding them of God's commands and their covenant, the rebellion might have been stopped. Instead, his weak compliance encouraged them to sin more boldly. Though the people sympathized with Aaron, God saw the truth. His gentleness and desire to please had blinded him to the gravity of the crime. His influence cost thousands their lives. In contrast, Moses, who faithfully executed God's judgment, showed his deep concern for Israel's salvation. The Lord was very angry with Aaron to have destroyed him. But in answer to the earnest intercession of Moses, his life was spared. And in penitence and humiliation for his great sin, he was restored to the favor of God. God cannot tolerate sins that lead others astray. Those entrusted with spiritual leadership must stand firm against transgression. Though God spared Israel, judgment had to be executed to prevent further lawlessness. Moses called out, "Who is on the Lord's side?" The tribe of Levi responded. Many others repented, but a large number remained defiant. At God's command, the Levites executed judgment, slaying about 3,000 men. It was a terrible act, but it stopped the spread of rebellion and reaffirmed God's authority. The Levites were later honored for their loyalty and dedication. Though guilty of treason, the people were shown mercy. Those who repented were spared, and the execution of judgment served as a testimony to surrounding nations that God did not tolerate idolatry. When accused in future generations, Israel could point to the punishment of the idolaters as proof that their sin had been condemned. God's justice is always tempered with mercy. He punished the few to save the many. If left unchecked, the rebellion could have led to widespread ruin, as happened in the days of Noah. By acting swiftly, God preserved the nation and prevented greater destruction. God is the guardian as well as the sovereign of his people. He cuts off those who are determined upon rebellion, that they may not lead others to ruin. In sparing the life of Cain, God had demonstrated to the universe what would be the result of permitting sin to go unpunished. The influence exerted upon his descendants by his life and teaching led to the state of corruption that demanded the destruction of the whole world by a flood. The history of the antediluvians testifies that long life is not a blessing to the sinner. God's great forbearance did not repress their wickedness. The longer men lived, the more corrupt they became. The people, overwhelmed by guilt and fear, mourned deeply. Moses promised to again seek God's mercy. He prayed, "Oh, this people have sinned a great sin. Yet now, if you will forgive their sin, but if not, blot me out of your book." God answered, "Whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out of my book. Go, lead the people. My angel shall go before you." This pointed to the heavenly record of all people's names and deeds. Those who persist in sin will be blotted out. Moses' plea showed the depth of his love, a foreshadowing of Christ's intercession. Yet Moses could not bear the guilt of others as Christ would. Later, a plague struck the camp. The people stripped off their ornaments in mourning, and the temporary place of worship was moved outside the camp, signifying God's withdrawal. Yet Moses continued to intercede, pleading for God's presence to remain. "If your presence does not go with us, do not bring us up from here. For how will anyone know we have found favor unless you go with us?" God replied, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." Still Moses pressed further, asking, "Show me your glory." God granted his request partially, allowing Moses to see his goodness, though not his full glory. No man could see God's face and live. But from a cleft in the rock, Moses saw the divine majesty pass by. This encounter strengthened Moses more than all his past experiences in Egypt. God's presence, not human skill, was the secret to success. Because Moses' soul was in harmony with God, he stood unafraid in his presence. God revealed himself, the Lord God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering, and abundant in goodness and truth, forgiving iniquity, but will by no means clear the guilty. Moses bowed and worshipped, again asking for forgiveness and renewal of the covenant. God answered favorably and promised to do wonders among them. Moses remained on the mountain for 40 days, during which he received a new set of stone tablets. When he came down, his face shone with the reflected glory of God. Unaware of this, he frightened the people who drew back. Moses reassured them, then veiled his face. This radiance signified not only God's law, but also the light of the gospel. During his time on the mount, Moses saw the plan of salvation revealed through symbols and types culminating in Christ's sacrifice. It was this divine light, as much as the law's glory, that shone from his face. Moses thus foreshadowed Christ, who veiled his divinity and humanity to dwell among men. Had Jesus come in full glory, sinful humans could not have endured his presence. But in humility, he came in the likeness of sinful flesh to uplift humanity. The heavenly light streaming from Calvary calls the whole world to seek him and remember Jesus' words. I have told you these things, so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world.